My name is Beth Knorr, and I work for the Countryside Conservancy. And I want to welcome all of you to this webinar with Chris Blanchard this evening on 10 simple steps to food safety. We're able to bring you these grants through a specialty crop block grant through the USDA and the state of Ohio, and we're so glad that we're able to offer these. We will also be posting the recorded session on our website after we're all finished. So if you miss anything that you'd like to go back to revisit, we'd encourage you to go ahead and check that out at our website after the fact. We're delighted to have Chris Blanchard with us this evening, sharing information on this important topic. Chris is a farmer and also has a consulting company called Flying Rutabaga Works, and he consults on a lot of different topics and also offers presentations on business planning, effective marketing, post-harvest handling, and of course food safety. If any of you read Growing for Market, I'm sure you have seen some of his really informative articles in that fantastic publication. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, I would encourage you to go ahead and type those in. I will be monitoring them and asking Chris to answer those as we go. Some of them we may hold off to the end of the presentation to have him address, but we'll try to get to as many as we can throughout the session. One final thing before I turn it over to Chris is there is a very, very brief survey at the end of the webinar. We would appreciate it very much if you took just a couple of seconds to fill that out. That really helps us with our grant reporting, and hopefully we'll be able to get another grant to continue to do these kinds of things. So Chris, thanks so much for joining us this evening, and I'm going to turn it on over to you.
Thank you, Beth. I'm really happy to be here. There we go. So tonight we're talking about our 10 simple steps to safer produce. Beth did mention that we've that I have a consulting company. It's Flying Rutabaga Works. We do a weekly newsletter that we publish that we publish once a week, and you can sign up for that newsletter here. You can also read it on the website at flyingrutabagaworks.com. So that's me. I think you guys can see me in the sidebar of your webinar. I don't look that relaxed very often, but there you go. That's Rock Spring Farm. We're up in northeast Iowa, so right up in the northeast corner of the state, and we're actually just a mile away from the Minnesota state line, so we like to call it southeast Minnesota. And it's hilly country up here. We've got we didn't get glaciated the last time that those things came south, so we've been going through a couple of extra thousand years of erosion. So the area is really nice because it's tended to keep it's kept a lot of smaller farms operating in the area, and just because of the landscape, a lot of the tractors that they drive in places like central Iowa, you can't even turn those around here in northeast Iowa in a lot of the fields. So I've been farming since 1990. I got my start at Deep Springs College out in California, California-Nevada border. I went out there to, hoping that I was going to learn to be a cowboy, and ended up working in the kitchen garden. Discovered I was afraid of cows, and decided that I would go ahead and I fell in love with vegetable farming and decided that's how I was going to spend the rest of my life. And so I went from there, worked on a lot of farms all over the country, got a lot of experience. I mean, back in the days when it's kind of funny how far food safety has come. I worked on a farm that did salad mix production back in the early 90s that didn't have a hand washing sink, and the bathroom facilities that were being used by the staff were an outhouse that was located 20 feet away from the packing shed. Worked on another farm doing salad mix production around that same time that wasn't where they made their salad mix, they didn't even have a bathroom or a hand washing facility that was anywhere near. So Rock Spring Farm, we've always focused on having stuff very clean, and because of that, it's been important to us that we had we're always using a lot of water. We're always doing a lot of intensive post-harvest handling. So the food safety was always something that really came to the fore for us. We did a lot of salad greens in our early years and spinach, and we're selling that stuff bagged in farmers markets up in Rochester, Minnesota. So that was something that we've always had to pay attention to. We've done a lot of work with extended season here. The first thing we did on the farm was to put up some greenhouses when we bought the place in 1999. And our product focus has always been on what we call these upgraded basics. So these are really things that, well, I'm the largest radicchio grower in the state of Iowa, but that means I sell about 6 cases of radicchio a year. And you're not going to make a living selling 6 cases of radicchio a year. So we've really focused on trying to grow things that people are used to eating, like onions, sun-gold cherry tomatoes, winter squash, but when we do this, we're always looking for ways to actually make the product a little bit better or a little bit more appealing to our customers. So instead of just growing cherry tomatoes, we grow sun-gold cherry tomatoes, which are, in my opinion, the best cherry tomato out there. When we do squash, we're always harvesting that squash extra ripe. It's meant, again, a lot of cleaning and a lot of handling. Our carrots they're not just clean, they glow, and they're really ready for people to take out of the box and eat right away. So when we do that extra handling, we have to think a little bit harder about the whole food safety thing. Our slide says we grew the farm really fast when we got started. Up until about 4 years ago, I did most of the work on the farm. I should say most of the work on the farm myself, but I was always involved in the day-to-day operations of doing the production, actually out there harvesting the crops, doing the seeding, working the greenhouse, doing the marketing. We went through some changes in 2007, 2008. We had some serious flooding here in northeast Iowa and southeast Minnesota. That we had 2 500-year floods in less than a year, and then I got a divorce. That happened at the same time that I was doing more work with the Moses Organic Farming Conference, and also being invited to come out to other people's farms and start to do some consulting. So I formalized that into this business of Flying Rutabaga Works. But what was interesting is at the same time that I started talking to other farmers about what they were doing on their farms and how their systems were fitting together and how they could do that better, I was also finding that we had an increased need to make our systems better on our operation because because I was now working with a farm manager who was actually managing this production on a day-to-day basis. So the systems didn't just have to make sense to me, they actually had to make sense to my farm manager, and they had to make enough sense to him that he could turn around and explain them and get other employees to fit into them. So it really kind of ramped us up in how we actually started to think about thinking about our farm operations from a more systematic perspective. So here we go. Okay, now we're going to jump into the food safety thing. So, I mentioned back in the early 90s, food safety wasn't much of a concern. Really, you knew that you weren't supposed to eat raw meat, but I mean, even raw meat, I think, was handled a lot more often than it is now, and handled a lot more cavalierly than it is now, and in recent years, it's gotten a lot more attention. Fresh produce it's really the last step before the consumer eats it. When we're doing vegetable production, I mean, if you do meat, presumably the customer's actually going to eat that meat before they do something with it. If you're in the canning or processing market, you're selling stuff to a processing plant, they're cooking it, they're freezing it, they're doing other things to it that make it much more likely that you're going to have a kill step. With fresh produce, a lot of times there isn't a kill step between when we finish growing the produce and when our consumers are eating it. And scientists, it didn't used to be really understood just how much foodborne illnesses are the result of they call it the fecal oral route, right? It means that when you get sick when you get food poisoning, most of the time it's because you ate poop. You ate, there were feces on your food, whether they're human feces or animal feces, that didn't get removed and didn't get killed in the preparation process, and now you've ingested those, and so you end up with those symptoms, the diarrhea and the vomiting, that end up turning around and taking what's on your insides, putting it on the outside so that somebody else can get, somebody else's food can get infected, and then that's kind of this whole fecal oral route, right? So what comes out of you goes into somebody else. And that's why foodborne illnesses tend to have those kinds of symptoms, because it makes it easy for them to spread. We've also discovered in recent years that there's the infectious dose for a lot of these organisms is, they used to think that you had to go across a fairly high bar. Now you don't so much. And some of that's because they found that the strains, I mean, a lot of the general strains actually are infectious at a lower rate than what they thought. But you've also got some of these strains are getting more virulent, things like the E. coli strain that makes people sick. And then the other thing is you've now got somewhere between a quarter and a sixth of the population that is immunocompromised in some way or another. So, that means that they're elderly, they're very young, they've had an organ transplant, they've got some sort of a disease that compromises their immune system, usually a chronic disease that compromises their immune system. Diabetics are immune compromised. So when you're selling produce at the farmer's market, you have to look and go, well, gee, somewhere between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 people that come up to my stand are at a much higher risk for getting a foodborne illness than somebody who's got a healthy, robust system. Now, part of that, again, in the last 20 years, we've got a lot of older people. People are living longer. There's a lower infant mortality rates, but we've also got a lot, and there's a lot more technology that are keeping people alive in ways that they weren't before, longer than they were before, in situations where they weren't before, but now those people are operating with a less effective immune system. And, when it comes right down to it, food safety is not just a legal responsibility, right? I mean, we've got the Food Safety Modernization Act that's coming down the pipe. You've also got the potential that food that has foodborne illness organisms on it is considered to be adulterated by the FDA, so it's illegal to sell that. But it's not just a legal responsibility, it's an ethical obligation to your customers. Of course, it's also good business, right? I mean, if you kill your customers, they don't tend to come back, and that's not exactly where you want to be. But it's also an ethical obligation to the local foods community, and here's why. In 2006, it's what they call the 9/11 of the produce world. We had this is when you have the spinach outbreak, right? This was happened in October. There was an outbreak. The spinach was the problems were quickly traced back to a plant in California. They tried to pin it on organics. It didn't turn out to be organics. But there was this. It was one of the first times that fresh produce really had this huge, monumental, multiple state outbreak, and everybody went into a panic about it. I don't know if other people remember this, but when I went into stores delivering my product in 2006, they had taken not just the spinach from the California growers off the shelves, but they had taken the Wisconsin growers' spinach off the shelves and the Minnesota growers' spinaches off the shelves, even though those weren't implicated at all in the disease. Grocery stores were taking everything off the shelves, and it wasn't just the large conventional grocery stores that were doing it. It was the small local food co-ops who have the kind of approach to where they should have known better and should have known that their growers were outside of the problems. These are highly educated people. They should have been able to figure this stuff out, but they didn't. And the result was we actually had a farm in Wisconsin here that went out of business shortly afterwards because of the cash flow hit that they took, because they relied on that fall crop of spinach to make things work in their operation, and they couldn't sell it. And what's crazy about this is that when we start to analyze risk in this country, we're really bad at it. In 2006, there were over 50 billion servings of fresh bagged salad greens and spinach that were purchased in the United States. And this one outbreak had 276 illnesses associated with it, and 3 people died. And the amazing thing about this is there was this huge panic, and now spinach sales, what are we, 7 years later, are still down. They've never gotten back up to pre-2006 levels. And you think about this and you realize what this implies for a local foods movement. If we get a foodborne illness outbreak that gets traced back to a local producer, and say that outbreak happens in the farm to school situation, then that's that's going to be the end of farm to school. That program's simply going to cease to exist, and you could do a lot of damage to a CSA or a farmer's market or to local foods in general if we actually do have an outbreak that gets traced back. So I think it's something we all do need to be aware of. And of course, I go through this and I talk about, well, gee, it's obviously not very risky. I actually think you stand a better chance of dying from falling out of bed than you do of dying from a foodborne illness, and here in the United States. But of course, we ask what risk is too much, and when it's your kid who's sick, that's when the risk is too much. So I do think it's being careful. And we have this myth that small farms are safer, and you hear this a lot in the alternative ag community and the organic ag community. They'll say, well, small farms are safer, and it's not that small farms are safer. In fact, when the University of Minnesota did a study on this a couple years ago where they looked at conventional produce, certified organic produce, and non-certified organic produce, and they actually sampled it for the presence of fecal coliform bacteria. In other words, the bacteria that's commonly found on feces. And they found that everything that they sampled from the conventional growers was clean, and everything they sampled from the certified organic growers was clean. But the stuff that they got from the non-certified organic growers, in other words, the smaller people, the folks that are less likely to go through the headaches and the expense of certifying organic, that's where they actually found contaminated product. And the small farms don't show up because epidemiologically, just because of a numbers game. The reach of a single outbreak at earthbound farms or Taylor farms is going to get a lot more people sick than a single outbreak from a small farm. And that's what you need epidemiologically. You need a single outbreak. But there's no good accounting for farms that are out there serving just a few hundred people, because you can't get at that from a statistical standpoint. So we don't actually have any way to say small farms are necessarily safer. And a lot of times what this comes down to is an ignorance issue. Now we've had a lot more education about this in recent years, but I talked to a food safety specialist here in Iowa a couple years back, and he told me he had recently been out to a farm where some of the members had actually complained about getting sick, and they thought maybe it was from the salad mix. And he said, okay, well, show me where you're washing your salad mix. And it was actually a grower who was washing her salad mix in pond water, and there were turtles in the pond water. And turtles carry salmonella. In fact, lots of people get sick from turtles, pets, and stuff. And she just had no idea that she was doing anything wrong with that. And of course, the people that are almost the most at fault in smaller operations tend to be the owners. There is kind of this attitude of, well, I own the place, I don't have to follow the rules. And when we talk about food safety, it's just as important that everybody on the farm is paying attention to the food safety issues, not just the employees. But just because you're the owner, and just because you're coming in from the field and you want to sample the salad mix out of the tank to see if it's in good enough condition to sell, you can't be walking into the packing shed with your muddy boots and your unwashed hands and dipping into the tank and grabbing a leaf, because that's going to put you in the position of being the person who's spreading the disease. Now, when we talk food safety, a lot of times people make it really complicated. There's all these rules that you have to follow and these record-keeping forms that people say you have to do. But really it comes down to three essential things. You got to keep the poop off the food. You have to know that you're going to get poop on the food. We grow food out in the real world, and so it is going to get contaminated. And so if you've got poop on the food, you need to keep the poop from spreading from one piece of food to another piece of food. And then you also have to keep the poop from growing. You assume that it's contaminated. You got to hold stuff at the right temperatures so that you keep it from growing and expanding, so that you've got more. Because of course, one bacteria might not make you sick, but 8 might. And so you want to keep that one from turning into 2, into 4, into 8, and then making somebody ill. So the first and most important thing with food safety is to wash your hands. If you did nothing else, if you walked away, you came away from this talk, or if you decide that you're going to log off here in the next 10 minutes, if you wash your hands and make sure that your employees have the facilities to do that, that's going to be the #1 way that you can prevent contamination of your food. This This is, washing hands, right? You got to have some soap. Oh, citation of the study. Okay, so I've got I guess I'm reading the chat there. Beth will jump in if we've got a question. So, of course, when you wash your hands, you actually need to use soap. They've done studies on this, and when you if you get your hands wet but you don't use soap, you actually it makes the microbes easier to transfer from one person's hands to the other person's hands, or from your hands to a doorknob, and then somebody else is going to pick it up there. So you actually, if you don't use the soap and you just get water, you actually make it worse than if you had dry, contaminated hands. So you've got to use the soap to get those microbes loosened up and really get that dirt loosened up down in the cracks and crevices of your hand. You want to get your hands soapy. You want them to rub them together vigorously, palm to palm. You want to get the backs of your hands getting down into your fingers. You want to, on the back of your hand, you notice how this person's using her, she's using her fingers to scrub it. So that's actually getting that soap up underneath her fingernails. That's a real common place to have bacteria get caught up. And then doing the same thing, getting in and really scrubbing all those cracks and crevices on the palm of your hand, again, using your fingertips so that you're getting in, driving that soap up into your fingernails, and also then really getting, like I say, those cracks and those crevices, because you get bacteria that get down in there, and a bacteria that's out in the open, has all of its size exposed, is easy to rinse away. But if they're down in those cracks, of course, those are going to be the ones that are going to stick with you. So you really want to get down in there, rub those guys out of there. And then you want to dry your hands afterwards. Now, I tried to find a good picture of using a single-use towel for this. And a single-use towel, like we have in this picture, something that you're going to use once and throw away, is really the ideal. Because if you use a towel again and again, that means that somebody who doesn't do an adequate job of washing their hands, the guy that washes his hands but doesn't use the soap, then uses the towel, now that towel is potentially contaminated. So if you dry your hands on a contaminated towel, you're going to end up with contaminated hands. So single-use towels are best. Use them once, throw them away. It is okay to use multi-use towels, something like this, but you can only use it once, and then it needs to get laundered. So, if you want to go out and invest in a whole stack of these, and you can get these pretty cheaply, you can get a big stack of them, but you're just going to have to wash them before they get used a second time. We talked about dry hands. A lot of people get confused about this, but antibacterial soap isn't necessary. It actually doesn't do any good over regular soap. So stick with the regular soap. Now, in our situation on farms, hand sanitizers are also not particularly effective. And that's because we have a lot of organic matter on our hands and a lot of clay particles. In fact, those are the ones that are going to tend to stick on your hands even more than the silt or the sand that's in the soil. And those clays and that organic matter have so many bonding sites, the same thing that make them valuable agriculturally, makes it so that it binds up the sanitizers and keeps those sanitizers from being effective. So there's really no substitute on the farm for using soap and water and scrubbing vigorously for 20 seconds. Now, you don't need hot water either. Modern soaps are just as effective in cold water as they are in hot water, but on our farm, we put in a small electric hot water heater. Our hand washing sink was located quite a ways away from the utility closet, so we actually put in this small electric hot water heater, so it's an instant water heater. And that way, as soon as someone turns on the water at the sink, they're getting good warm water to wash their hands, because I didn't want to be watching people waiting for the water to get warm. And I also know that people who are washing their hands in 45-degree water, which is our temperature of our well water here, are not going to scrub their hands for a full 20 seconds underneath that water. This cost us about $200. It was relatively inexpensive, and I think was a really good investment for us. Hand washing sink doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, here you've got one. I mean, this is this would be probably ideal if it was stainless steel. We went with, I don't remember why we bought a porcelain one, but that's what we ended up with. You can see that it's got these, it's got the paddles on the handles so that you can, so that you can turn it off with your wrists or with your elbows after you're using it. It's got a nice high neck so that nobody's going to get that all soapy and icky. So really, this was designed for as a hand washing faucet and as a hand washing sink. But better than nothing is going to be to have something that you scrounge out of the barnyard and put together. This is on a large vegetable farm over in Wisconsin. This is their hand washing sink. It's not ideal, but it works. You'll notice that this is a hand washing sink. There's nothing else here. Once you use the sink for washing the contaminated soil off of your hands, then you have to assume that the sink is contaminated. So you wouldn't turn around and use that sink for washing equipment or for washing produce. Hand washing always happens in a separate, dedicated sink. It doesn't happen where you're going to be handling produce or where you're going to be handling equipment. This is another really simple hand wash sink here. It's got it's got a garden shut off and a water breaker on a hose that's hanging down from the ceiling over a basin. So it doesn't have to be fancy, and it certainly doesn't have to be expensive. Now you'll notice that these guys aren't using single-use towels, and that's less than ideal situation. You wash your hands. I think everybody knows this after you go to the bathroom, after you've been smoking, because that's got your hands up near your mouth, and your mouth is a potential source of contamination. After you've been petting animals, after you've been eating, and then the most important thing is that you want to wash your hands before you touch food or anything that touches food. So really, any time that you or your workers are coming into the packing shed, that's when hands should be being washed. And also, of course, before you go out to the field, you should be washing your hands. Before you scrub crates out or harvest totes, that's going to be a time when you want to wash your hands. So really, before touching food, before touching anything that's going to touch the food. The second most important thing for food safety is to make sure that sick people don't work. Like we said earlier, vomiting and diarrhea are almost always the result of foodborne illnesses. This is how they transmit, and this is how they get around. And when people have vomiting, oh, I'm supposed to say this first. It doesn't take much. I mean, this is really the amazing thing with how small of an amount of bacteria it takes or viruses to sicken everybody in the United States. This one called rotavirus is a fairly common source of the so-called stomach flu. It's quarter cup, and we can sicken everybody in the U.S. It just doesn't take that much. And vomiting and diarrhea are both explosive events. The stuff comes out of your body. It's being forced out, and it comes out with such force that when it hits whatever surface it's going to hit, it actually aerosolizes. So it's turning into microscopic particles that are then small enough that they're floating around in the air, just like if you were to use hairspray, the stuff kind of floats and it lingers, and that's what happens with the particles from vomiting and diarrhea. What that means from a practical perspective is that it's all over the place. If you've got a worker who has diarrhea, they've contaminated that entire bathroom. It's not just that they've contaminated themselves. Their clothes are going to be contaminated. The bathroom's contaminated. Anybody that comes in there is likely to contaminate. So it's not just a matter of keeping your employees from having diarrhea out in the field. It really is keeping them off of the workplace entirely. So we handle this at our farm through our employee manual. Our employment agreement makes it clear that sick people don't work. Now, the side benefit of this, of course, is that it also keeps people from coming to work hungover. We just send them home because they're a food safety hazard. But it also does mean that you as the farmer also need to be paying attention to this. If you're sick, you shouldn't be out there picking your produce. This is just a small step that people can take. Again, don't enter this facility if you've got any of these symptoms. They go through some of the common food poisoning symptoms. reminder about washing your hands. You know, these sorts of things make a difference. Inspectors love this stuff, but it also is just a reminder, along with some basic food safety training and orientation for your employees, that if you're sick, you don't belong here. Third thing to do for food safety is to shut out the animals. In other words, keeping the animals away from the food as much as possible. This does mean domestic animals too. I know what my dog rolls in. I was actually just watching him roll in and out my window just a couple of minutes ago, and I don't want that in and around my produce. Okay? We work to keep the deer out of our fields. I never talk to anybody anywhere who doesn't have problems with deer. We've really been happy with this 3D deer fence that we got from Premier. So it's 2 strands on the inside, 1 strand on the outside, and it's an electrical fence. So the deer come up, they get confused about how far it is to jump over it, and then they touch the fence with their nose and they get a healthy shock. It does take a lot of work for maintenance, but it really does keep the deer out. You know, for maintenance, of course, you got to keep the grass off of an electric fence, or else you'll drain everything out of it. And so we send somebody through with the weed whip. They basically walk down between the 2 wires. We do turn them off first. We're not that mean to our employees. Not providing a home for the winter critters. You know, again, you got to think about it. You get mice in the wintertime. The mice carry diseases. The mice poop. But that poop is going to be hanging around when you start processing your food. You don't want those rodents to establish habits of being in your packing area either, because once they're there, you might throw them out, but they're going to come back again. So on this farm, this is an outdoor packing shed. It's just on a lean-to. They take their tanks, they turn them upside down, and put them up on their stands so that the rodents don't have a place underneath there to sneak in and hide. So you want to have nice high spaces underneath things, keeping things away from the walls so they don't have a spot to hide. We talk a lot about the process of monitoring for pests, seeing when you've got a problem. So on our farm, we're using, we keep a log here. I don't know if I don't have a picture of it. So we keep a bunch of traps around the farm. We're monitoring those traps every week. If we have a problem, then we set more traps and monitor more frequently in the places where we have a problem. And then if we consistently have problems, we look for ways to try to exclude our pests from that area. This is just our log here that we keep when we check when we do find a problem in one of our traps. If we find a mouse or find the trap has been sprung, we'll come back, we describe the activity, but then we make sure that we're checking that trap every single day until we have 10 consecutive days with no activity. Then we take that hot spot off of the list. So that's how we keep it from being completely overwhelming. We're monitoring, and then when we do have a problem, then we move into active control mode. We use these what they call them, like an automatic cat trap that's a repeating mouse trap. So it's a live trap. We get the ones that have the clear top on them. We have one in each of our coolers. We have one out in our packing area. We have one in our packaging room, and then we also keep one in the greenhouse. Now, the greenhouse isn't really a food handling place, but we actually have gotten a lot of benefits of being able to keep the rodent population under control there, and made our transplant seeding go better by incorporating that into our regular process of checking those traps once a week all year round. We never get a population that establishes in there. This farm, then, this is the same one that was keeping the rodents out from underneath their tanks. They took they've got open rafters up at the top of this lean-to, so they stapled up bird netting. This is something they got, I think, from Farm Tech. I think it's relatively commonly available. It's a plastic netting, and it's enough to keep the birds from getting up on top of those rafters underneath that metal roof, underneath the stickers up there, and building their nests. Because of course, once you get birds hanging around up there, then you get birds pooping up there, then you get poop on your food, all the problems that come from that. We used to have a hoop house for a packing house, worked a very nice facility, but we we did have a fly problem in there. We have a dairy farming neighbor. He's quite a ways away, but we still do get a lot of flies in the summertime. We put up this ribbon, and it's a long sticky ribbon, and it's attached to this. It's got this spool down here, and the of long. Well, it's a spool of sticky tape, and you can see that there are just gobs and gobs of dead flies on there. So once that tape filled up, we'd put all the food away first, of course, and then we'd actually add another spool at the other end of the house that was used for rolling that up. And so we would roll that up, and the fly carcasses would crackle and pop. It sounded like a bowl of Rice Krispies, but it got them all cleaned out. It was a very effective way of reducing our insect population there, since we weren't able to exclude them with screening from that facility. And of course, minimizing insect populations in the first place. Don't have your livestock grazing around your packing house area. If you do have, if you're using livestock to transport stuff, if you've got a horse pulling a cart, when they get up to the packing shed, if they do their business there, you want to make sure that you remove the feces so that you're not encouraging insect populations anywhere near where you're handling the food. And then securing and removing the waste. Now this is a fairly sophisticated way to doing it. This is called a dump bin, or a materials dump bin, and they can pick this up with that forklift, drive it out to their compost pile, pull a pin, and it just tips and dumps itself out. What we use on our farm is a plastic wheelbarrow. So when we have compost that we're generating during the day, it goes in the plastic wheelbarrow. At the end of every day, it goes out to the compost heap, which again is well away from the packing area. But you don't want any food sitting around the packing area. You don't want to be encouraging rodents and birds to come in and check that. We want to secure it, and we want to get it away. Cleaning and sanitizing, of course, keeping things from getting we've talked about things getting contaminated directly out in the field, but then, assuming again that things do get contaminated. There's dust, there's flies, there are rodents, other things happen. So making sure that we're cleaning and sanitizing our equipment is very important. There's a really specific process that you want to go through for this. The first is you want to rinse the equipment off. So this would be, when I say equipment, I'm talking tanks, I'm talking harvest totes, I'm talking barrel washers, brush washers. Rinse them off first. That's going to get rid of an initial layer of organic matter and debris. Then you're going to clean. You want to scrub. Here these arrows are pointing to the deposited soil, so you want to be, using a detergent, or you can also, if it's not really dirty, you can just use your elbow grease, right? Just get in there and rub that stuff, get at that deposited soil, loosened up. Rinse it again, so that's going to remove that deposited soil, and now you're down to the contacts, to just the bacteria and stuff that are sitting on the contact surface. Usually, if you've done your job by this point, you're really dealing with a microscopic layer of stuff, or the individual bacteria, and then you're going to put the sanitizer on that. If you don't remove that dirt, like we said earlier about the hand washing, in the presence of soil, in the presence of clay particles and in the presence of organic matter, most detergents are very quickly inactivated. They attach to those clay particles, they attach to that organic matter, and they're not going to do the job of attaching to the bacteria, because a clay particle's got a lot more attachment points than a bacteria does. On our farm, we use Oxonia Active as our hard surface sanitizer. So for the sanitizer we use for sanitizing surfaces, this is a product that we get from Ecolab. I have a certified organic farm. This is a product that is approved for use on certified organic farms, and we get it from the same people that we get our water sanitizer from. Now, this is another place where we want to use sanitizer, but a lot of people misunderstand how sanitizing wash water works. If you're putting bleach, or now in this case, this is an acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide blend. They call it peracetic acid. You put this in the water. What that's doing is it's sanitizing the water. It's not sanitizing the produce itself. Okay. If you've got bacteria on the surface of the produce, it's gonna kill that. But the surface of produce is all. The leaves have all of these wrinkles, and I use a fancy word like crenulations, but it's all folded up, and there are places for those bacteria to get in to hide. Now this happens to be E. coli bacteria in the stoma of a leaf. So this is where the water and the oxygen get vented out of the underside of the leaf on a plant. But those are bacteria. They're up in there. That if you're using a sanitizer, it's unlikely, first of all, that it's going to diffuse fully up into that stoma, because the water that's there is going to be the water that's going to tend to stay there. But also, even if it does, it's not going to make full contact with that bacteria, because there's all of these other things going on in there. See, there's this other stuff growing up in there, and it's protecting the corners of that. You know, you can imagine if you had a bacteria over here on the side, that it's going to be kind of tucked into here, and the sanitizers aren't going to get all over it. It's just going to get a part of it. And it's not going to fully kill that bacteria. It might weaken it, but it's not going to kill it. And so then it's going to live and reproduce again. If you've got feces on a piece of produce, you can't harvest that produce. Don't touch it. Don't bring it into the packing house, because you can't take it off. Even if you brush it off, you've still got these bacteria. They're going to be hiding out down in all of these crevices that you've got in your plant surface. This is a nice stand that was put together. This is at Harmony Valley Farm over in Wisconsin. This is where they keep their sanitizers. They've invested in some things like hand pumps there to make it easy to get the sanitizer out. You'll notice they've got the measuring containers. They've got the squirt bottles for being able to wash down surfaces. So this is how they put that together. We did the same thing with wooden crates on our farm, and I just want to point out this stuff is fairly acidic, and down here at the bottom, you know, underneath this tank on the right-hand side, we actually dissolved some concrete. We weren't paying attention, and somebody left that spigot open, and it was just dripping there. And as it dripped, it burned a nice little hole in the concrete. So you want to watch. This is very caustic, and you want to be careful with it. Of course, testing your water, making sure that you know that your water is safe to drink it. I don't know what kind of a subsoil or a subsurface you got in Ohio, but here in Iowa, northeast Iowa, it's all limestone, and it's all fractured, and there's water flowing every which way, and it doesn't follow any logical patterns. You know, just because water one way overland doesn't mean that's what it's doing underground. And so and even you get down a couple hundred feet, you know, it's possible that you've got contamination coming into your well from places that you don't even know about, far away, you know, whatever. But you want to get that water tested and make sure that you're not washing your produce in water that has been contaminated. Of course, it doesn't do any good to take all this effort to clean your produce if you've got produce that you're washing it in water that has fecal coliform bacteria in it. On our farm, we test our water quarterly. Now we're producing and packing product year-round here, so quarterly is what we've had recommended to us for that. If you're not washing produce in the wintertime, obviously you don't need to be testing your water in December if you're not packing out food in December. In Iowa, we handle this through the university labs. I don't know the systems. Every state seems to have a different system for their water testing. But this should be the kind of thing, if you get in touch with the county sanitarian, they should be able to steer you in the right direction for inexpensive water testing. These cost us $15 once a quarter. Wearing the right clothes for handling produce can be an important way of preventing contamination. So SHUD, this is actually the food hygienist word for the combination of manure and crud that gets on your boots when you're working in the barnyard. And again, you're out in the field. We consider the soil by definition to be contaminated. You can't. The bacteria are microscopic. You can't necessarily see them when they're there. So we assume that when we bring mud into the packing shed, that mud, yes, we grow our food in the mud, and I mean it's out there and our ancestors eat it, but you know, when we bring that mud into the packing shed, we have to assume that it is contaminated. So wearing boots that are easy to rinse off. Rubber boots are great for this, really smooth rubber boots. The muck boots that have become popular lately, they're neoprene, they've got more insulation. the surface that they have on them doesn't rinse as clean as something like a classic old-fashioned rubber boot, which really is going to clean off and can be sanitized quickly and easily, and a 95% job done just with a hose. So you aren't bringing that stuff into the packing houses. We really encourage our employees to wear aprons. Now, in this case, I'm wearing a pair of overall bibs. Here, these are a white plastic. They're Helly Hansen. I really like that brand. They're good, sturdy ones. I use the white ones in the packing shed because they look like a packing shed. They make it look like you're in a position to be handling food. And so the aprons do two things. I mean, it keeps dry as an employee, but it also keeps any crud that I've gotten on my shirt from falling down then into the produce. So what you don't want is to have, if you've been petting the dog or holding the cat, and now you've got cat hair, and that cat hair is potentially contaminated, and even if you take the cat hair off, you've still got potentially bacteria and other dust that's in the virus particles that are on your clothes, that when you lean over that water could potentially be falling into that water and contaminating that and the produce that's in it. So wearing an apron, now you can see clearly I've still got some surface of my clothes that are exposed, but it's going to be reducing the amount of surface of my clothes that are likely to cause contamination. You'll notice that I'm wearing gloves here. That's actually not a food safety measure. Really, gloves haven't been shown scientifically to increase food safety. If you put on gloves with dirty hands, now you just got dirty hands. You soil the gloves. Now you got contaminated gloves, and you're still moving the contamination around it. Gloves, if you're going to use those on your farm, they actually do require a little bit of additional training to make those an effective food safety tool. Most importantly is that they need to be changed often, and you can't use them when they're worn out. And in this case, it's to keep my hands dry. We still do need to be washing and sanitizing these gloves. And making sure that they're not transferring contamination from one employee's hands to the other. Because if I take my hands out of those gloves, if somebody else was using them, their hands were contaminated. Now I put my hands in there. I take my hands out because I'm gonna do something with my bare hands, potentially not contaminating my produce with my bare hands. Of course, working with livestock, thinking again about clothes here. You go up, you feed, you water your sheep, and they rub up against you, and now all of a sudden you're contaminated, right? Your clothes have got manure on them, and the sheep, I use this example. They're when they're out on lush green grass, they do get the runs, and you'll oftentimes see that their fur has been that they actually defecate on each other when they're in a tight pack, and again when that gets washed off, even if that gets clean, they look like they've got white wool, they still got those manure particles on it. So you go up there and you start feeding the sheep or working around them with the water, they start rubbing up against you. Now you've got contaminated clothing. So you want to think about either doing yourself or providing your employees coveralls, overalls, something that you can put on to cover up your clothes. Go work with the livestock, come out, change out of that stuff, and then go work with the produce. Or better yet, do the produce, then do the livestock. That would be the best thing to do. Of course, managing your manure is important. E. coli survives 260 days in the soil. So, that's longer than the organic certification requirements, and would certainly say that even something like you apply raw manure 120 days in advance, you've still potentially got issues. Now, the FSMA is going to be addressing this by trying to lengthen that out. I think they're talking in the draft rule about a 9-month rule for applying raw manure to the fields before you grow produce in it or before you harvest produce from it. Again, thinking about having good equipment. Not using. If you're putting compost on the field, and presumably that's good, clean stuff, doesn't have any foodborne illness organisms in it. Now, if you go and haul raw manure and then you go put compost in there, now you're potentially contaminating that compost. It doesn't take much to make things sick. Making sure you're applying your manure in a way that it's not going to contaminate produce. If you've got two fields next to each other, spreading raw manure and then getting a rain and having that rain wash the manure over the crop over the field where you're growing produce, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? And even with compost, especially with farm-made compost, it's really difficult to get 100% turning and incorporation so that really you get everything into the hottest part of the compost. I know even when we've gotten compost from our commercial suppliers, a lot of times they'll bring in a semi-truck, they'll dump the stuff here, and that pile's going to heat up one more time. That means it's still got a lot of biological activity going on. There's still nitrogen that can be eaten up with it. And it means also that it's likely that there's stuff in there that hasn't been fully blended into the compost pile. Even in a commercial setting, that happens. So think about how different that is on the farm when if you're turning something like a front end loader. I'm a real big fan of trying to separate the functions between different processes in the farm. So we like to talk about having things move from being dirty to being clean, and we want it to be a nice linear flow. Okay, we don't want to have a bunch of dirty stuff next to the clean produce. Now here, this is actually a bad example. This is me washing. I had my packing shed didn't really provide for this. When we were using the hoop house, it had one door. So the dirty produce and the clean produce were all coming in and out of the same relatively small area, and there wasn't a lot of space in there to line up all the dirty stuff at one end and have the clean stuff at the other. So this is less than ideal because I don't want to be handling that dirty product and then turning around and handling my clean product. So again, thinking about that idea that soil, by definition, is contaminated. So, something like a barrel washer or a brush washer can be a nice tool because you put the dirty produce in at one end, it gets progressively cleaner as it moves through it, and when it comes out the other end, it's clean. So we like that nice linear flow. We also like to separate the process of taking the dirt off of the produce from actually keeping the produce clean. So this is a picture of a packing house up at Featherstone Farm in southeast Minnesota. They have a very long, narrow packing room, and down at the far end, they're putting dirty carrots into the washer. They're moving towards this end, and you can see how down here they're making an effort to keep they're keeping boxes up out of the water, off of the floor. The boxes over on the right-hand side that already have the liners in them, they're being kept up again off the floor on a food handling surface. Things are going onto the pallet. Now this also has the additional advantage of you don't want to be shipping out dirty boxes, right? That's bad practice. But this guy's whole job is happening down here at the clean end. The guy that's up at the other end, his whole job is happening at the dirty end, and they don't mix. They don't cross. This guy, the guy at the clean end, doesn't go and help the guy at the dirty end because he doesn't want to get contaminated and then come back to the clean end of the line and have dirt on his hands, dirt on his clothes, and then he's going to turn around and end up potentially contaminating the produce that he's got down there. Now, on our farm, we put up a new packing shed in 2006. We were actually right ahead of the spinach debacle, and we put in a room just for packaging. And this is really common in the say in a meat packing plant where they will you kill the animal in one place, you gut them in that place to get the manure off of the animal and away from the animal, and then it gets moved to another part of the facility. Usually it goes through a door, goes through an open window, some sort of a constriction, and then that's where they're going to cut it up. So they're getting it clean, getting the manure off in one place, keeping it clean in another place. And we use the same principle here. Outside of these doors, we're always working to get the product clean. And then once we go through these doors, this is the place where we keep it clean. So this is where we're doing our bagging, putting things in clamshells, whether it's herbs or salad greens or tomatoes. All of that happens through these doors. So that we've really separated the dirt removal process from the keeping it clean process. Now we actually weren't looking at this from a food safety perspective at all. We kind of lucked into this one. We just did it because we wanted to have a clean place to bag produce. It's really difficult to keep your salad greens clean or to do a good job of clamshelling herbs if you're hanging around in that same space where somebody's running a pressure washer and then blasting dirt off of the carrots. The other thing I note here is that we strategically place the hand washing sink right outside of those doors, with the idea that people going in there need to be reminded, okay, we're keeping it clean. Now it's time to wash our hands again. You know, it doesn't do any good to put a hand wash sink at the back of the packing shed where nobody goes. You want to get it in the flow of traffic through to where people are, you know, you go buy the hand washing sink on your way to do your work. You know, it's same idea here with having separate items or separate containers for compost, separate tools used for non-food work. So we took some of our harvest totes. We use these plastic harvest totes. The ones that we're going to use for compost all got painted red. On our farm, red means that if something's red, you can use it on a non-food contact surface. So these are painted red. We actually have red and orange for compost buckets, so we cheat, pretend that that's red. The brushes that we would use for doing something like cleaning the walls, that's a non-food contact surface. We're going to use a red brush for cleaning the walls. Same thing with the shovels that we use for cleaning out, you know, for scooping up mud off the floor, for cleaning out the trench. Those things should be marked in red so that we know that that's what they're for. We use then blue brushes on our farm are used for keeping blue is for things that for food contact surfaces, so for cleaning out totes, cleaning out tanks, things like that. And then green is actually what we use if we're cleaning produce with a brush. Green things can actually touch the produce. So that's our color coding system that we use. Yeah, just another picture. See, that's compost, right? So it's not food anymore. And you'll see these totes are sitting on the floor. They're sitting on the floor because they're compost totes. I actually don't want my compost tote going on top of a pallet that's going to have something that's touching the food get placed on that pallet again later. So, you know, again, keeping things as separate as we possibly can. Now, this would get used until these compost totes are full. Then these are going to get taken out and dumped into that wheelbarrow. Again, as soon as these fill up, and then that wheelbarrow is going to get run out to the compost heap at the end of every day. You know, I'm never really convinced about this one, I have to admit, but they say it's important. It's having a recall system. Now,
Chris, before you launch into this, can I interject with a question?
You bet.
So a question from one of the participants is whether or not you're concerned at all about the exclusion from the Food Safety Modernization Act for small-scale producers, given the study that you cited earlier.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, if okay, am I talking with my activist hat on or my food safety proponent hat on? Okay, so first of all, I think that the whole food safety, the Food Safety Modernization Act is laughable. We have such bigger fish to fry in this country, and anything that drives up the cost of fresh produce actually has a negative effect on the overall health of our population, and I hate to see that. I happen to be a fan of doing record keeping myself. It does me good in my consulting business. I teach people how to do this, but I also don't want I don't want overburdensome record keeping, and I don't think it does anybody any favors. And but at the same time, if we're going to say that fresh produce is so gosh darn dangerous, then why in the world would we exclude small growers from it, from having to meet the requirements of the act? I think it's more an enforcement issue than it is more than it is an actual safety issue. And I think it actually, to me, it shows, I'd say as an activist, I think it shows that the whole food safety thing, it's really a sham. I mean, again, let's go back. 50 billion served in 50 billion servings of spinach and salad mix served in the fall in 2006 here in this country. And we end up with 3 people die, and we end up having to overhaul our food safety system because of that. It is more dangerous to get out of bed in the morning then you're more likely to slip and fall getting out of bed than you are to die from a foodborne illness. And if you go back and look at things like the listeria outbreak last year in the cantaloupes, person after person after person, I haven't looked at the entire list. I think there were 85 deaths from the listeria outbreak. That was a bad one. Listeria is bad because it hangs around for a long time. I think the incubation period on listeria is up to 90 days. So, potentially you had, if you had cantaloupe in the streams where people got sick, they didn't necessarily know that they were going to get sick for a very long time after that happened. But most of the vast majority of the people that died were over 85 or under 2. And not that those people don't have value, but they're people that their immune systems were already compromised. So it's not like we're taking healthy people and making them sick with our produce. We're taking people who are already not healthy. And those are the ones that are getting sick from these really exceptional outbreaks. They just aren't that widespread. And we get more people die from chicken from taking, from cutting up a chicken in their kitchen and contaminating their own produce than you actually have from farm-born and farm-bred illnesses. I don't know if that answers the question or not. I think it's silly that we're not requiring it from everybody, but I think it's ridiculous that we're requiring this from anybody. The idea that we gave the FDA authority over fresh produce, I mean, could you ask for a bigger regulatory nightmare? These people aren't farmers. They don't know what they're talking about. And, I think we've really set ourselves up for a mess. On the other hand, this is what we got. The legislation's been passed. The President signed it into law. And now we've got the regulations. So the rule's out there. I do encourage everybody who has time to read the rule. If you don't have time, read the commentary on the rule and get your comments in. Comments are open until May 15th, I believe. And the great thing is the FDA is required by law to respond to every comment. They don't necessarily have to respond to you, but they do have to address it in the rulemaking process. And organics changed the nature of the organic rule that the USDA had put out back in 1999, and I think we do need to look at doing that again with the FDA rule, and there needs to be a lot of focused attention on that. I know everybody's busy in the greenhouse right now, but it is something that I think we need to be really aware of. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that was a good answer. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, it makes me rant. And the recall system, I guess it's actually a nice segue here into this idea of a recall system, because everybody's really concerned with you have to know the day and the field from which your product was harvested, and you have to know exactly who it was sold to. I mean, the reality is if my food makes somebody sick on a farm my size, I'm taking everything I got off the shelves. And I'm probably going to be out of business anyways because somebody's going to sue me, and I don't care how much liability insurance I have. Farm Bureau is going to do everything they can to get out of paying it. And once we get done, even if I've got a $1 million liability package, you kill a couple of people with a food safety outbreak, that $1 million isn't going to get you very far. So, it really is. I mean, I think there's kind of a balancing act with this recall system. The most important piece here is that any produce that you sell to somebody who's not a retail customer, okay? In other words, if you're at farmers market, I don't feel like you need to have this kind of labeling on your product. But for a lot of times, it would be completely impractical. But if you're selling to a store or to a restaurant or to a wholesale distributor, you do need to make sure that your product is leaving your farm with a label that has, at a minimum, your farm name, your address, your phone number, and if you have one, your website, so that if there is a problem, people can get back in touch with you. Of course, a label's a nice thing. You want to build your brand. You want to be proud of your product. You want to make sure you're getting that out there in the marketplace. We label ours with a lot code, and this is an old lot code that we used to use. We have a system now that we've gone to. The lot code is just a way of tracking your product, through the chain of handling. So for us, it's a way that we can look at the lot code, and that tells us that the information about doing that packing was recorded on a certain piece of paper. We can look on that piece of paper, and that'll tell us where the product was harvested, or we'll link back to the harvest records. So it's just a way of establishing that paper trail and tying one piece of paper to another with a number. Hope that makes sense. I didn't do a big lot coding example for what we're doing today here. But this is going to be a requirement under the FSMA, and it's my understanding that the FSMA, the part that people are exempted from is the inspection part. You still are supposed to be following the rules. You're supposed to be doing good food handling, and one of the things the FDA is going to consider to be good food handling is that you can trace your product one step forward to the customer who bought it from you and one step back to the field and the day on which it was harvested. And if you are suspected in a food safety outbreak, then the FDA can still come in and shut you down and impound your produce or inspect your facility. And at that point, you do become subject to the FSMA from that point going forward, once they even suspect that you've been involved in an outbreak. At least that's how the draft rule reads. And I'm going to be surprised if that changes at all. Harvest logs. I do a lot of workshops on record keeping. We've got a really good system here at Rock Spring Farm. It doesn't have to be something that you generate in Word and photocopy. This is something that's used at a farm that grosses over $1 million a year in sales. Their harvest log is still just a photocopied thing that they whipped up with Sharpies. So don't feel like you have to go overboard on what you're doing with actually making everything pretty and perfect. Good enough is good enough in this situation. Being able to track the stuff back is what matters, not necessarily how it looks. The 10th thing, the number 10 step for food safety, the last one that we've got, really is washing your hands again. And you can't emphasize this enough, how important the hand washing is for food safety. We handle the produce with our hands. We handle everything else with our hands. So they're not only are the part of our body other than where the stuff comes out that's the most likely to be contaminated. It's also the part of your body that's the most likely to be handling the produce and to come in contact with it. So if there's one thing you do, it's washing your hands, soap and water, okay, for 20 seconds, and then using a single-use towel or using a towel just one time and then washing it, because drying your hands is just as important as getting them washed, and then you're good to go. So that's the food safety rant. That's what we got, and so I see it's 7:10. So I think we've got some time to do questions if people have them. I hope that we've covered a lot of material, so there aren't a whole lot of them out there. But I also hope that we've set enough things that we have raised some questions for folks.
So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type those in now so we can have Chris address some of them. So I do have a question. Aside from hosing off your boots and that kind of thing before you come into the packing shed, Chris, what other kinds of things like that before you come into the packing shed do you do? Do you do anything else in particular?
Nope. I mean, again, washing your hands is I think the other really important thing. I mean, I've said that before. I mean, even your boots. I mean, if we're going to treat the soil as being contaminated, we're kind of going to treat the floor as contaminated. The food falls on the floor. If it's been washed, it's contaminated and it goes out the door. At that point, it's compost. Okay, because we assume that even if you rinse off your boots, you're bringing in soil on them. Again, aprons can be another additional step. I like to see workers in the packing area wearing aprons. It keeps them dry. It reminds them that they're working with food. I think some of those mental things that you can do that tell people, to remind them that they're not just out there like being, hey, like it's all good and I'm growing food and I'm feeding people. It's like, okay, we're here, we're handling food. People are going to eat this stuff and we got to keep it clean. So kind of trying to think about some of that costuming stuff as being an attitude adjustment. Now, sometimes for me as a manager, I end up going into the packing house to address issues when I haven't wash my hands and I'm going to be turning around and going right back out again, one of the tricks that I use is to just put my hands behind my back when I walk in. If I haven't washed them, I'll stick my hands behind my back, go and talk to the person I need to talk to, and leave again. But not letting my hands get in front of me means that I'm never going to be tempted to pick something up or touch anything that could potentially cause a contamination issue with my unwashed hands.
So have you, in terms of washing and rinsing practices, do you focus more on rinsing with running water, or do you do any dunking type of rinsing in a tub situation, or what are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
If you're talking about for handling the produce,
right? For like rinsing it off and that kind of thing.
So it depends on the crop and it depends on how much soil we're dealing with. Almost, every leafy green on my farm, when it comes in from the field, it goes into a tank of water. So we're gonna dump it out of the container that it's in into a large tank of water, and then from that tank, it's going to get, the water in that tank is going to get a wash water sanitizer. So that's that Tsunami product that we buy from Ecolab. A lot of conventional growers just use straight food grade Clorox bleach. You can't use like the scented Clorox bleach. You'll be trying to make your salad mix taste like lemon. Okay, use the food grade stuff. And that's going to keep any contamination from spreading from one piece of produce to another. From a food safety perspective, dunking your produce is about the worst possible thing you can do, okay? Because you're taking, so if let's take broccoli for example. I see bird poop on broccoli all the time, right? So if you bring in a head of broccoli that's got a bird poop on it, and you got another 100 heads of broccoli, and you dump all of those into the same tank of water, that poop's going to dissolve, and those bacteria are potentially going to contaminate all 100 heads of broccoli. Whereas if you never put those into a tank of water, if you cooled it down some other way through forced air cooling or with ice, you'd be able to avoid you'd be avoiding having that one head of broccoli contaminate the rest of the heads of broccoli. But practically on a farm that's my scale, I don't have an ice machine. Forced air cooling is not really what I need, and I need that humidity. I need that wet. That wet cold that's going to suck the heat out of the crop from a post-harvest handling standpoint. So I'm willing to take that risk, but I use a wash water sanitizer and I test my water. If I'm doing a crop like melons or tomatoes or peppers, those are going to get sprayed off rather than getting dunked in the water, because when you take if you have a warm melon or a warm tomato or a warm pepper, and you dunk that into cold water, there's actually the potential, because of the temperature differential there's the potential for water to get sucked inside of the fruit. And it can get either sucked in through the blossom scar, or it can also get sucked in through the stem scar, and then it'll actually end up inside of that fruiting crop. So that's something where we are a little bit more careful, and we do hose those things off or scrub them outside of going through a tank of water.
Okay. We do have a couple of questions coming in here. One person says that you mentioned, keeping the fecal matter from growing or spreading, and what about temperature and with regards to handling it? And are packages such as clam shells a part of the way that you can help protect from cross-contamination?
Right. So the first one, temperature, is a really important element. The rate of bacterial activity roughly doubles for every 10 degrees increase in temperature. So if you're holding produce at 52 degrees, well, here let's do the normal progression. So if you're holding produce at 42 degrees, the bacteria is going to grow on that twice as fast as it is on produce that you're holding at 32 degrees. And if you're holding produce at 52 degrees, it's going to be growing twice as fast as it is on twice as fast as it does at 42 degrees, which is 4 times now as fast as it's going to at 32 degrees. So keeping produce, storing it at the right temperature is a really important tool for farmers to mitigate the food safety risks. But obviously there are some crops that you don't want to store that cold, right? You don't want your tomatoes down at 35 degrees. You're going to ruin the flavor of them. So that's a balancing act there. As far as putting things in clamshells, it's less an issue of cross-contamination, because that, having, if you've got a bunch of dry stuff, remember we talked about how your dry, dirty hands are less likely to spread contamination than wet, dirty hands. So it's not really much of an issue once you get to the point of putting things in clamshells, of avoiding cross-contamination. Where you're really going to make a difference is that now you've got the consumer isn't going to be handling them with potentially contaminated hands. Okay, because I think this is probably one of the bigger risks that you've got out there, is that you've got some snotty-nosed kid who's been, or a mom who's just changed a diaper, or you name it, somebody that didn't do an adequate job of washing their hands in the grocery store, and now they're handling your produce, picking it up, turning it over, looking at it, and now the stuff that you delivered perfectly clean to the store is now contaminated. So having stuff in clamshells certainly helps with that.
Well, and that's a nice segue, talking about customers handling the produce. Another question is, how do you feel about customers who are using their cloth bags at the farmer's market, and do you see that as being a concern? Because, we can go through all these steps of trying to protect our produce, but we don't really have any control over what's been in their bag, or what they're putting your produce in with or up against, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. It's one of my favorite affirmations is, all I can do is all I can do. And what I've got control over is what happens to the produce on my farm. Once it goes in somebody's bag, I can't do anything about that. So that's the customer's risk. And that's a potential food safety hazard. On the other hand, I use cloth bags every time I go to the grocery store. I'm probably recontaminating my stuff. But that doesn't affect anybody else. As a customer,
right,
it only affects me. And if we want to think about this from a food safety outbreak standpoint, from what we'd call a public health standpoint, because that's what food safety is, right? I've got the potential as a farmer to make a whole bunch of people sick. I'm not worried about somebody eating the one piece of broccoli that the one sick bird pooped on. Okay, the chances there are so small that something's going to happen, and it's not going to result in an outbreak. I'm not going to make hundreds of people sick that way. But if I take that broccoli now and I spread that poop around to all of the broccoli that I'm selling, now there's a good chance that a bunch of people are going to get sick. And that's where you end up, that's the public safety aspect of it, is you've got a lot of people potentially being harmed by a product. Whereas somebody who's putting it in their own bag, they're just doing their own thing.
Well, does anybody else have any other questions? I don't see many rolling in at this point. I think the presentation was very clear and pretty straightforward, and I appreciate that kind of pragmatic information, Chris. So if we don't have any other questions, I don't know if you have any final comments or anything.
Boy, I wasn't prepared for final comments. I guess it would be to make another pitch. I mean, the fact that you're here attending a workshop about food safety on a Thursday night in the spring means that you clearly have some interest in this. Maybe you're concerned about the regulations. Maybe it's just something you realize is coming down the pike. But I do think that activism around the Food Safety Modernization Act is going to be really important. Paying attention to what's happening and what your industry papers are saying about that. You don't necessarily have to sit down and read the 500 or 900-page rule yourself, but getting somebody organization that you trust to help you understand what's going on, and then making sure you're getting in contact with the FDA about that, submitting your comments. I think that's the only way that we're going to get a rule that actually works for us as small, diversified vegetable growers.
Okay. Well, I don't personally have any other questions, and we don't have anybody else posing any right now. So I want to thank you so much for your time, Chris. I think it was a great presentation, very informative, and like I mentioned earlier, before we began, we will post the link to the webinar recording on our website. And again, I'll put in another plug. Please just take a couple of minutes of very, very brief survey at the end of the presentation. If you wouldn't mind taking just a few moments to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it. So thanks, Chris, for joining us. And actually, Chris will be joining us again in April 24th, for another webinar on how to calculate prices for your products. So join us for that as well. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Okay, good night.
Good night.